What's up, everybody? Welcome to Make Things Tiny. My name is Mick. Tennessee is by far one of the most popular states in the US for going tiny, with builders and community options to choose from. So today you're in for a real treat because we're going to hear from Brenda. Brenda lives in their tiny house in the state of Tennessee. They're going to share their entire journey from deciding to go tiny, picking a builder, financing, which I know is a huge one for those of you who are looking to go tiny. So this is a great video for those of you who are looking to go tiny, looking at Tennessee, and just wanting to know the honest truth about what life is like before, during, and as you're sitting in your tiny house several years later. So if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and let's jump into it. Let's hear about Brenda's tiny house journey. I am here with Brenda. Brenda is a fellow YouTuber here on YouTube. Their channel is called Simply Living Tiny. Thank you so much for being on the channel, Brenda. I'm excited for people to get to learn about you. If you don't mind, just to start talking a little bit about what made you decide to go tiny, and then we can go from there.
Thank you, Mick. I'm so happy to be here today, and I want to say that I really appreciate you and I appreciate your channel and all the education, making people aware of different things to look out for if they're looking to go tiny. And so I wanted to say thank you very much for all the information you provide us. And so the reason that I wanted to go tiny was I rented for a long, long time, went through a divorce, all of the things. But looking at purchasing a home on a single income, it was just not something that was realistic for me to do. And this was before the pandemic. And I know things are got a whole lot more expensive since the pandemic. And I loved watching like the tiny home shows and so I just thought, well, I feel like I could do this. I feel like I can live in a tiny home. And it was more doable for me on a single income. And so that is what started the tiny home journey. It was something that I felt that was doable, sustainable for a single person's income. And plus they're really cute and pretty too.
No, that makes sense. And I think that's a really good point to bring up. Just you thought it was doable. And when you're looking at, like, especially people watching, the channel my channel and yours today, like when they're looking at, buying a house versus, going tiny, like, it's a much, much cheaper situation compared to, trying to figure out how am I going to buy a $400,000 or $500,000 house and down payments and all those different things. So I think it's great that you were able to already watch the shows so that you had a sense for, like, okay, this is an option. And then, being able to make that decision. So I'm glad that you were able to do that before the pandemic, because, like, as you said, it's definitely gotten much worse. Were there any sort of like must-haves in your shopping process for going tiny, and what did you end up deciding to purchase?
Yes. And so I also wanted to share too that I lived in it was like 1,700 square foot apartment. I had 3 bedrooms, 2 bath. It was 2-story. And I was only using like not even half the rooms. And I thought, and then you spend your day off cleaning the rooms that you don't
That's
use.
true. That's
And
true.
so when I made that mind shift from going from a traditional foundational home to looking into tiny home, that was another reason too. I just wanted to share that because who wants to spend their day off cleaning spending all this time cleaning? And with the tiny home, with it being a smaller footprint, it's not that much maintenance. In a couple of hours, you can have it clean top to bottom. And so what I decided to go with, so that was a journey in itself because tiny homes, even though I had a good standing with my bank, I went to my bank like it's because I knew I would have to borrow money to purchase a tiny home. I didn't just have money sitting in the bank to like go and pay for a tiny home. I didn't have anything to sell. I know some people sell their traditional home.
Mhm.
They use that money and they pay off their tiny home. I didn't have those options. And so I looked at different resources as far as getting loans because tiny home, it's still, even though they've been around for 25 years, it's still like a gray area, even though it's built like by RV standards. And whenever you get a loan, it's under an RV loan. it was still very difficult because it's really not an RV, even though
Mhm.
it goes by RV standards. And so, in doing my research, I found Tumbleweed Tiny Home Company, and that was my one stop for everything. So, they were my builder, they were my financer, they delivered the home, and the whole process was very, very, very easy. And they would send me updates like every Friday, send me an email with some pictures on how the tiny home was going, the progress. And so once I found Tumbleweed Tiny Home Company, which they're like the four founders, fathers of
Mhm.
tiny homes, it all started with them back in the day, like even before the turn of the century. They started doing tiny homes. They started with like chicken coops and sheds and things like that, and it just kind of grew from there. And and so I guess because they've been around so long, they knew what the needs are of the customer, and they are able to meet those needs of the customer. So they made everything like seamless. And they're in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and I'm in Northwest Tennessee. And so I didn't fly out there and or drive out there and do any of like walking around or anything like that. I knew it was a reputable company. And
Mhm.
so it's very important to do that research, making sure that who you're dealing with is very trustworthy.
That's really great that you were able to get in touch with Tumbleweed, and it's also good of you to be able to vouch for that too, because I do know that not everyone that is going tiny in the place that they're living, not everyone has access to enough builders or maybe even like quality builders where they could really vet them. So it's great that you were able to get a tiny home from a reputable builder across multiple states without ever seeing it. And from what I can tell, you really enjoy your home and you had a you had a great experience overall, which is really great. You did briefly mention the finances piece, and for a lot of people that are watching my channel in particular, most people are actually thinking like, how can I finance it? Like, there's not a lot of people that are like have 100 grand sitting around or something like that, as you've mentioned. Do you mind talking about like what your tiny home costs and what the financing process was like for anyone who might be watching and considering going that route?
Yeah, not at all. Actually, that was probably for in my situation, that was the biggest roadblock that I met was finding that financing because I had before Tumbleweed, I had contacted a couple of other builders and they didn't do financing.
Hmm.
And I really needed because I had met these obstacles like with my personal bank. I watched a YouTube video one time. Somebody had mentioned like using SoFi and they
Hmm.
use that to like finance. I contacted them. That was a no. And so when I ran across Tumbleweed and I had watched some YouTube videos of people that have their channel and traveling in a tiny home or they bought a tiny home and it was Tumbleweed and they even sell like people who do their DIY projects and they'll buy like tumbleweed plans and and so I was familiar with it through other people's YouTube channels and so I just checked them out and I just called them up and it just started from there. So my home cost it was 108,000 and I just barely got in before the pandemic.
Hmm.
So I got my home in October of 2019, and of
Wow.
course,
Yeah.
in 2020, it just all went kind of crazy, right?
Hmm.
And so God was watching out for me, so I got in like right right before the craziness of the world. And so I told him what my needs were, that, I needed help with the financing. And then, of course, you have insurance. That's another
Hmm.
obstacle. So they were my one stop for everything. They were, and so what they did, I did have to have like my mortgage company is called 21st Mortgage. And I don't know if they're like all over the US, but they do have like it's on the opposite side of the state of me. Well, I think it's in Nashville. I can't remember. Nashville and Knoxville is where they're located. I think it's Nashville. And so it's called 21st Mortgage. And then they wanted like 10% down. And I was like, okay, how are we going to do that? Because 10% of 108,000 is more than I had. And
Mhm.
so they set me up with another lender called Era Academy, and they are out of Colorado Springs. And so I was able to get a small loan through them. So they helped me through the whole process. And through 21st Mortgage, since I'm mortgaged with them for the tiny home, my insurance is also set up through them. It's called insurance, and
Okay.
it's probably like about, I think it's around $1,200 a year, and that's built into my mortgage payment.
Okay. That's
It's a
really
lot to,
great.
yeah, it's a lot to think about because
Mhm.
that is an obstacle too for people
Of
getting.
course.
You want to have insurance on your tiny home, that way if anything happened, you want to make sure that you're covered. And so some people, in doing the research and watching, guidance from other people on what you need to look into, the insurance was another part of it. You don't really hear people talk about it that much, but you got to have insurance for everything, right?
Yeah.
For your health, for your car, for your home, you need to have that insurance.
Mhm. It's really good that they thought about what people would need and then they sort of packaged it all together. I think a lot of people, because I do have people reach out to me and they ask questions about builders. I do think that a lot of people don't realize that a lot of builders don't provide financing. So their job in their mind is just to build the home, and then it's up to you to figure out how to pay for it, which is fair. That's the same way that a lot of things for our big purchases might work. But
Mm.
I think in your case with Tumbleweed, it sounds like they really put in the extra effort to make sure that they could answer all those questions, which honestly makes it easier for them to get people. Because if every person that goes to you wants financing and you don't have financing, that is going to make it hard for you to sell the tiny
Mhm.
homes. What size tiny house did you end up going with in terms of like the design and the square footage?
The name of my tiny home is Elm,
Mhm.
but of course, I made changes. I felt like I was the upgrade queen. They're like, yeah, we can do that, but it'll be an upgrade.
Oh yeah.
Finally, you have to like draw the line in the sand and like no more upgrades, because you're just gonna you can. Uh, so the tiny home, the M, I think it was like around 80,000, and by the time I did all of my upgrades, it was like around 108,000, and I just had to quit and say no more upgrades. But 8.5 by 30,
Oh, okay. That's pretty
yeah.
big. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, I think 30 feet now, like 8.5 by 30 now. So like if you paid 108 in 2019, it's probably closer to 150 now.
Mhm.
For especially if you did upgrades too. So I was just thinking about what that probably translates into now. People would probably be spending well over 108 to get a
Right.
30 by 8.5.
And back in 2019, that was a pretty large size because
Mhm.
usually your average, it's probably like, what was it, around 28 feet? Most people did 26 feet, something
24.
like
A lot of people did 24s.
that.
Yeah. 24 by
And
8.
right. And so back in 2019, that was a larger size, and
Mhm.
nobody had a 10 foot wide tiny home back then.
Yeah.
And nobody had downstairs bedrooms. Now, like the design of this elm, it did have a very small downstairs bedroom, but it made the bathroom teeny, teeny, tiny. It took away from the kitchen. And I didn't really have the need for like a teeny tiny downstairs. I mean, it was little. And so I just like told them, forget about that downstairs bedroom. And
Mhm.
I wanted that space because I wanted an actual bathtub instead of a shower
Got it.
stall,
Yeah.
and a larger kitchen because, you know, I just didn't feel like I would utilize that space. So they were really great with like changing the plan around. On the elm, you have like a 2 foot porch, like where I am right here. This
Mhm.
was supposed to be like the 2 foot porch and the door. So I wanted that 2 feet in my living room instead of using that 2 feet for my porch. and then I moved the door into the front of the house instead of at
Okay.
the end of the house. And so they were really, really great with me on specific things.
Mhm. Yeah, it sounds like you did a lot of you're able to do a lot of planning and figure out what you wanted and what you needed, which I think is huge. I think
Mhm,
that's something else people don't really think about that are considering going tiny. There's a lot of questions you need to answer before
mhm,
you get to the stage where you've picked it out, because by then, you could find a builder and then you think you really like that design, but it turns out you can't customize it. So not every builder allows you to change that floor plan. Some of those floor plans,
mhm,
like this is what we make, you can't customize it for you. So I think it's good that you were able to like make sure you knew like what it is that you wanted.
mhm.
Have you experienced any challenges since living in your tiny house now, and like how long have you been in it? What's that been like for you?
Oh, yes, I have. You think you get something brand new, it's newly built and everything's gonna be perfect for, like, 10
Hmm.
years and you're not gonna have any issues, but that has not been the case. So, in delivering, because they did deliver, they didn't set up, so I had to get some help for setting up. And they help you too, Mick. I want to share that
Hmm.
whenever you need to prep your land, whenever you're deciding where you're going to put your tiny home, if you're not going to like a community or something like that, you got to be able to prep your land. So that was part of like my insurance too, not just tumbleweed, but taking pictures, showing what I had to do to prep my land. They told me what to do, and then I would
Okay.
just execute that. And so they delivered the tiny home, and that was a little pricey. It was like $4,000, which they took their time. The driver was really sweet and took his time and drove it in like 3 days. But he had
Hmm.
pulled into like a truck stop, gas station, truck stop place, and somebody had hit my tiny home.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
It was minimal damage.
Right.
I was like, "Oh, so that's how it started, just
Okay.
like trim, it
Hmm.
wasn't like nothing major, tail light and, trim." And then I was in my tiny home so that was delivered in October, I think around February, March, still winter and cold. My Aqua hot water heater totally died, and I was without hot water for like 5 or 6 months.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and so that was a big obstacle. Again, we were in the pandemic,
Right.
and so trying to find I really recommend, I cannot stress this enough how important this is. It's very, very important for you to find your resources before you need them.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people, tiny homes, you call people, a plumber, an electrician, your on-demand hot water heater. They're not, they kind of steer away from tiny homes. Some of them, they're like, well, I don't work on tiny homes. And even though it's stuff that's still in like a regular house, they're kind of leery about working on tiny homes. And so I had contacted, of course, this is during the pandemic, contacted like an RV place that they did have aqua hot water heaters in their RVs. And they come out, they couldn't fix it, but then they were done because it's the pandemic.
Hmm.
Um, and so it was just like a snowball of stuff. And so I ended up just totally getting rid of that and getting like an on demand hot water system. So I have issues with that. I've had issues with my pipes freezing. I had a washer dryer combo that died right after the warranty went out,
Oh
like
my
a month
goodness.
later. And then trying to find a washer dryer combo that'll fit in your small doorway into the bathroom.
Hmm.
They had to take the trim off to get that one out, get a new one in. And so, yeah, you would think that everything would just be all cool for, many years, but it just hadn't been that case. And you just tackle one problem at a time,
Hmm.
find a
It sounds
resolution.
Yeah. No, that's a lot of different things, but again, like, I think that, you know, being able to share that experience, which I know you do on your YouTube channel, is
Hmm.
really priceless information because for the most part, what people have access to in this industry is just pictures and tours of the homes, right? So without
Mhm.
the honest takes on what the industry is like, or what, communities are like, or living in the house is like, I think it sets people up for, unexpected costs, for one, potentially like a
Mhm.
sense of failure, getting scammed, which is something I've talked about before too. So I think it's really, 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 really awesome that you share this information with people and that you're willing to be honest, because there are so many different things people wouldn't think about in terms of things that could break or something like that.
Mhm.
Which leads me to my last question for you is like, what advice do you have for the people that are watching that are thinking like, okay, I'm ready to call tumbleweed. I'm ready to go and get the tiny house. I want the same exact one that Brenda's got, or something like that. Like, what would you tell them that they need to really consider, as they start to take those steps towards, going tiny?
Well, it's a process. Watching the tiny home shows like on HGTV or YouTube channels, it's really good with like coming. I recommend it because I find that people are so creative. I'm just
Mhm.
so amazed about how creative people are. And I still watch tiny home shows. I love it. And they'll come up with a design. I'm like, they are so smart. How did they come up with that? Why didn't I think of that? But yeah, doing that research, but it's more than just the pretty things and more than just the design. You need to think about your climate. Find a builder, like if you live in a colder climate, find a builder that's going to, because I have had so many issues with, pipes freezing and trying to come up with a solution with that. And I know that that's been, I wasn't the only one. A lot of people have issues with that. So doing the research basically. And so not just think about like the design of the tiny home, finding a builder that you can trust, search them. If you're able to, go see them, walk through the tiny homes, read,
Mhm.
comments from other people, because people they're gonna tell you the truth. They're gonna tell you their experience, whether it's good or whether it's bad, and you really need to educate yourself. If you're really wanting to go tiny, I would recommend go ahead and start paring down,
Mhm.
because in my experience, like I got rid of all my furniture. That stuff goes like really, really quick because you're going to be living in a different kind of space.
Right.
And so, looking at furniture that's multifunctional, that it can serve many purposes because you are in a small space. And even though I want to share that, even though I've had obstacles like with things like breaking down and trying to find somebody to come fix it, that I have no regrets going tiny. None at all. I love living in my tiny home. I love the design of my tiny home. And, even with all of the obstacles that you face, I mean, that's just life. You know, things just happen and you just work your way through it. But preparing for things to happen in advance will make going through it a whole lot easier. So
That's really great
hopefully,
advice.
yeah, hopefully that'll help. Hopefully that helps somebody. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just love, even though I don't travel in my tiny home, it's still on wheels. It wasn't recommended by insurance to take the wheels off. So it's still on wheels, but it's tied down. Um, I have that freedom still. Like if say I live in Tennessee and say I want to move, across the country, and if you have a traditional home, you got to put your house up for sale. You got to try to wait for, some most people can't move until they sell their house, right?
Mhm.
And but with a tiny home, because there's communities that are popping up all over the US, you just search for a really good community to put your tiny home on, and you don't have all that hassle with moving. You can take your home with you. You have that freedom to be able to do that.
That's true. That's a really good
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
And that drew me to it. Because you never know what twists and turns life is going to throw at you. And you might think, well, this is where I'm at now. I'm going to live here forever, but we just don't know what the future holds for us. And I liked having that freedom with the tiny home too. I knew I wasn't going to travel with it, but I wanted the freedom to be able to move it if I wanted to.
Mhm. No, I think that's important in thinking about, what you want to choose. 'Cause if you choose a tiny house on foundation, there are pros and cons to that. And a con would be
Mhm.
that you can't move it. But yeah, I think that the most important thing is that you don't have any regrets, which is fantastic. You don't regret it. You love where you're living, and you also recognize that you don't have to do it forever, which is what I always, I try to remind people that it doesn't have to be a decision that you're making for the rest of your life. It could be something that you do for a few years to try out, just to save money
Mhm.
or just to have an adventure. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and talk to everyone that watches the channel about your experience. And I'm excited for them to go to your YouTube channel, Simple Living Tiny, and check it out and subscribe to your channel. I'm going to make that plug here for people and listen to the advice that you have and just follow you on your journey too. So there'll be a link to your channel in the video description so people can check out everything that you're doing. And yeah, I appreciate you just taking the time to chat with me and just share your experience with us.
Well, I appreciate being here. And I knew when I started the YouTube channel, I was going to be very transparent. So the good,
Mhm.
bad, the bad, the ugly. And, just the ugly just comes up in life sometimes. We can't prevent it no matter where you live. You can live in $1 million home and things are still going to break, right?
Mhm.
You got to work through that too. So just don't have the misconception of living in a tiny home. Life is just going to be perfect. I'm going to live in a tiny home. It's going to be a fairy tale life. It's just life that things break, things happen, and you just get through it just like you do everything else in life
Yeah, no,
and
yeah, of
enjoy the journey, right?
course. Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you saying that. So yeah, thank you so much. And hopefully people reach out and check out your channel and ask questions.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Brenda.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, anytime. All right, so that's my conversation with Brenda. I appreciate Brenda taking the time to walk us through the entire experience, sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to going tiny. I cannot stress enough how important it is to reach out to people who live in tiny homes. So thank you again, Brenda, for taking the time to chat with us. Make sure you check out Brenda's YouTube channel, Simply Living Tiny, here on YouTube. There's a link in the video description. And if you haven't seen my other videos where I interview people who live in tiny homes and share their honest truth, you can check those out here. And don't forget to think tiny. I'll see you guys in the next one.